Congressman Cory Mills, welcome.
Thank you so much.
You just visited Syria. How many times did you visit?
This is my third time. I went in April, not long after the fall of the Assad regime. I went again in September, and then my recent trip that I just came back from.
Wow, is there any difference that you noticed between September and now, April?
I would say there's a lot of differences. I mean, the ability to meet with all the ministry, you start understanding the personalities and what their objectives are. But more so, you start even seeing the transition with the President al-Shara as well as Shadia Ajlouni, the current foreign minister. And so you watch where not only did their priorities kind of shift a little bit, but you see where they've kind of matured in the seat. You can see where they're starting to truly take over and try and govern as the country needed and is necessary. So it's been nice kind of seeing some of these progressions. And look, there's areas that are very stalled and delayed. There's areas that I was hoping to see a little quicker improvement. But you really can't detect.
What areas are those?
I'd love to see an improvement in the actual financial infrastructure capabilities. I'd like to look at telecommunications, even if it was something similar after the Caesar Act, where we lifted SSTs on a partial kind of conditional way to say, okay, telecommunications, because we want to get rid of the old system that was input by Iran and China and others that are still being utilized. As far as the financial system, we need to get away from just utilizing the simplicity of sham cash and start looking at real point of sale capabilities for each one of the shops, looking at the idea that if you will, in the future, encourage tourism, not everyone's going to travel with massive amounts of cash.
Exactly.
And so it's really getting yourself to a point where you can start receiving investment. And that's what I'm most concerned with GCC, with the United States, with Europe. What is their actual financial capabilities to invest when they don't have a way to receive it outside of pallets of cash? And so we certainly want to see an advancement in that. But speaking of advancements, I mean, you can see other areas where they've done fantastic. I mean, they're a part now and a partner in the U.S. ISIS coalition, where we can de-escalate and try and take and counter ISIS strategies and fighters. They've been great at trying to support stabilization by, for example, blocking weapons transfers through Syria from Iraq and the Shia-backed Iranian militias to go to Lebanon to be used against Israel. So there's a lot of areas of improvement with discussions with Muslim for the SDF to looking at how to address the foreign fighters issues. So there's areas that I would love to see more improvement on, but in a post-conflict nation, it's very difficult to try and drive a solidified timeline.
Yeah, that is very true. We just saw pictures of you visiting and meeting with the President, Ahmed al-Sharia. Did you discuss these matters with him? I
did, actually, and since the very beginning, I can remember when we first sat down together. I was a soldier. I served in the military in the 82nd Airborne Division, and I was a combat veteran. So, I spoke to him and just said, listen, let's take a moment now. You stop trying to be a president, I'll stop trying to be a congressman. And let's just be soldiers, understanding that we have a mission objective to finish.
Wow.
And you kind of see him lighten up. And I kind of look at him, because even at the capacity that I serve federally, transitioning from a soldier to try and understand how the bureaucracy works, how slow legislation is, looking at the economic capabilities. And again, the strength of a nation is always going to be their economy. But in this meeting, we sat down, we discussed where things were, what some of the U.S. concerns are, what's kind of still being discussed with regards to the inclusiveness of everyone who is Syrian, whether it's Christian, Catholic, Orthodox, Muslim, whether it's Druze, Alawite. The point is that everyone should feel safe and know that they have a voice. And so we discussed where, issues that have been arising out of the coastal region, or whether it was out of Soweto or whatever the case, how these need to be addressed and how they need to be condemned if there are rogue, security forces or rogue tribes that are trying to continue to do things. They need to be a voice for the people to say, even if we weren't able to prevent this, we see it, we're aware of it, and we don't approve of this.
Did you have a positive feedback from him?
We had a good conversation. I mean, look, he's very eager to try and start getting investment into the country. He's very eager to build relationships with those in the region to try and help with stability. He's been very supportive of trying to weaken China and Russia's position, which has been a stronghold for Assad for so many years, and also push Iran out to where he can go ahead and understand that Iran's, the greatest state sponsor of terror. So Look, this comes at a great risk. We recognize the assassination attempts and plotting and planning against al-Shara. He's a man who, he's not afraid of death, obviously, but he's also a man who wants to see his country have that nationalistic pride to rise. And I think that's a very positive thing to see. And so, I understand his past. And at a point in time, I think that if we took the approach that if one person's your enemy one day, they'll be forever, we wouldn't have a relationship with China, we wouldn't have a relationship with Japan, we wouldn't have a relationship with Vietnam or Germany or any of the others who we've gone to major conflicts with. But we have to recognize the fact that this is our one and only chance to try and truly stabilize the region. I think the right person for it is President Trump, who's the only one I believe who can do it.
Now, we know that President Trump described the President Ahmed al-Sharia as having a tough past and having a very strong leader personality. How would you describe him?
You can definitely see that he has got a very strong personality, but there's also a soft spot for him. And that softness in what I see is, which is why I have such hope for Syria. Iraq has been plagued with so many issues through the years because of sectarianism. You would ask someone in Iraq, for example, what are you? And they would say, oh, I'm Kurdish, or I'm Sunnah, or I'm Shia, or I'm Qadiyya, whatever the case may be. Syrians represent themselves with nationalistic pride to say, I'm Syrian. And I see that softness for al-Shara is the fact that Syria is a nation that he really wants to see stable again. He doesn't want to see the dictatorship, the authoritarianism, the brutal kind of and horrendous barbarism that was performed under the Assad regime for decades. And I think that if there was a weakness in him, that weakness would be his love of nation. And I think that's a good weakness to have. With regards to a strong personality, you have to have it in the position that he's in. You can't have a weak president or just a politician when you're talking about integrating and dealing with foreign fighters. You're dealing with extremism. You're dealing with such a wide variety of different secular beliefs. I mean, this is a very poverty. I mean, infrastructure development. How many buildings and cities have been destroyed under the Assad regime?
Have you visited any of the destroyed areas?
I went to Joba, as an example, which was completely demolished. And this is an area which wasn't an area of poverty. It was actually one of the wealthier areas. One of the trips we recently took, which was really a blessing, is we went to the top of the mountain where you can see all of Damascus. And it's such a beautiful view. And I remember we were sitting there, it was actually, yes, where actually one of the first radio towers and stations was. But then you look at the history and think, this is where Assad used to stand and launch barrels of chemicals at his own people. This is an area they utilized to be able to fire and destroy cities like Joba. And you think to yourself, what kind of madman, what kind of leader can look down on his people from one of the most beautiful mountain scenes and think, my job is to commit genocide? And so, I look at these impacted and affected areas and I think, just like you said, poverty, economics, getting the basics of municipalities, water, sewage, making sure education is a priority, hospitals. And so Syria, by the way, I mean, this even in the United States, some of the best doctors we have are Syrian doctors.
True.
And I live in the great state of Florida, and I can tell you there's a tremendous amount of Syrian doctors, very educated society. The thing that they need, though, is a strong leader to help rebuild the nation. Is al-Shara the president for all times? No. But he's the president for now, because what he has to deal with has to be from an economic, diplomatic, has to be from a military perspective, has to be. So I think that having a good, strong personality is necessary right now.
Okay, when you say now, does that mean like now till 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, transitional period? How long do you think he is needed?
To be honest with you, one of the things that I learned in the United States, and I love foreign policy, and I love kind of looking at geopolitics. It's one thing to help support, to liberate a nation from dictatorship. But America shouldn't be the one who determines and dictates who's the leader of a nation. That should be determined by their people. And I think that one of the biggest mistakes that we made in Iraq, for example, is the idea of this 2005 Constitution, whereby Article 76 set forth sectarianism, which had not really had been a thing since probably a pre-apartheid South Africa, Northern Ireland. So it was kind of a failed strategy. But you look at kind of Paul Bremer and some of the ideas of George W. Bush, and I got to be honest with you, I'm all for trying to liberate and trying to protect the innocents, like you saw with the 40,000 plus innocent Iranians who were just killed for what we call First Amendment rights in the United States. I'm for the idea of trying to ensure that a nation has an opportunity or it has an ability to stabilize, but ultimately it should be on the people of that nation to determine who their leader is.
Is there any good news for the Syrian people?
Well, since my first visit, I would say there was good news. I mean, while you could see from a decade of warfare this kind of exhaustion on the Syrian people's faces, what you were seeing was souks were opening. People were out in the markets. You know, I went through the old souk yesterday and, you know, it was completely crowded. The artisan craftsmanship was coming back, the handmade, hand-sewn this or that. You could see where life was starting to be breathed back into, you know, the Syrian culture instead of Damascus. You know, I got to go up to some of the farmlands in the mountains. I got to go to Moses Cave, which is a very interesting place that had been carved out for 120 years underground. And, you know, you're starting to see where there's life back in Syria. And so if I had to say what was positive, well, I went and visited on Easter, you know, various religious areas, met with the two patriarchs, was able to be blessed by Bishop John in Aramaic, the language of Jesus. And you were watching where these young families and these children, I've got pictures of these beautiful children that are just smiling and laughing and running around. You had this father who I saw, he had a 2-month-old, just little girl, I mean, beautiful little baby. And I was smiling and he literally like came over to me and, you know, offered for me to hold her. And, you know, I was able to hold her, and even though she was crying and upset and clearly hungry, that's what it is, it's a rebirth. And so I think that seeing that rebirth and giving the country a chance is really what's necessary, but ultimately it comes down to good decision making by the leadership.
How does the current war between Iran on one side and Israel and the United States on the other side affect Syria?
And you got to think of the major benefits of this. One, you're denigrating the IRGC's capability, who for years, under Hossein Salami or even the former Quds Force commander Qasem Soleimani, expanded out Shia-backed proxy militias in a terroristic way across Yemen or across you know, Lebanon with Hassan Nasrallah or with Hamas in Palestine, or if you look at in Iraq with Hashd al-Shaabi or any of the others. I mean, you saw where this terrorist network had completely drove the destabilization of not just that region, but the targeting of Westerners. So, you know, when you look at a new Iran, and I do think that the Iranian people, and this is where I think there's a connection, there's a big correlation between Iran and Syria, is that when Syria was successful in overthrowing this dictatorship like Assad, the Iranian people started watching what was happening in Syria. And I think that I gave a little bit of hope to the fact that, you know what, they can do the exact same thing, even though they've had Khomeini for 47 years, since 1979, that if this nation can do it, then we can do it too. And look, there was a lot of blood spill in order to try and go ahead and see that freedom and that democracy start in Syria. And the people of Iran, especially the youth who I'm most impressed by, you know, they've stood in that street protesting and chanting and wanting change, you know, screaming to the top of their lungs, Javid Shah, looking at the return of perhaps even his crown prince, the Reza Pahlavi. And, you know, when I look at what the U.S. has done, and again, every other president prior to President Trump has talked about wanting to put, you know, strengths or weaknesses on Iran and building the relationship like that. This is the only president who truly takes action. And I think that the world is seeing that when he says something, he's very serious. Whether it was Maduro, who was chanting from Miraflores, "Here I am, come get me," whether it was Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who thought he could run rampant, whether it was Qasem Soleimani or Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis out of Iraq, the thing that you're seeing is that this is not a president who bluffs. And again, you know, we talked about, do you need a strong president? In times of conflicts and looking at what's happening in the world today with so many atrocious things, you have to have strong leadership. And we saw, look under the Biden administration in the United States and how the world was shaping up, and look at it under President Trump. Look at Syria during the Assad regime. Look what it's like right now under al-Shara. I think that we have to just acknowledge the fact that no one wants war, but sometimes you have to escalate to de-escalate. And I think that Syria has been a great partner in trying to push out Iranian influences. And in my first meeting, I remember even with Shabani and al-Shara, they said, we will allow an embassy or a consulate from Iran in Syria to maintain relationships, but we will even be watching how many visas are issued to the Iranian people because we know that they're influence campaigns. Why does he know this? Because of the very thing that he's ridiculed for, his past. He's fought against these people, he's fought with these people, he's fought, you know, various conflicts, understands the significance of influence campaigns and how effective Iran has been. And so sometimes in a time like this, you have to have strong leadership. And I think that Syria has actually sided more with us than ever with Iran.
On a personal level, we can all see that you really love Syria to come here 3 times in the last year. Can you tell us why Syria is so important to you?
Syria is actually personal to me. And it's personal because, I have an 11-year-old son named Noah. And I would love to have the opportunity one day to feel comfortable in bringing him to the Middle East, to Iraq, to Syria, to Jordan, to the UAE and other areas. And he actually lived in the UAE for a short period. But just to be able to understand and embrace his culture. But also, I feel like if you're a good congressman, you should know Constitution and you should know history. And I love history. And you're talking about the cradle of civilization. Again, yesterday on Easter, I was able to get a blessing from Bishop John right next to the road where John the Apostle had walked. I mean, you talk about the rich culture, the history, the hospitality. The Middle East, in many ways, if you look at certain areas, are kind of like the South, where if I invite you into my home, I'm responsible for you. I'm going to feed you. I'm going to take care of you. You're going to have a place to sleep. I'm responsible for you. And so, I've spent a lot of time, almost a decade in the Middle East in total. And أنا فهمتك يمكن 50% عربية.
أنت ابنك نص عراقي.
أنت ابن 50 عراقية 50 أمريكية. But my thing is that there's just always been a pull for me towards the Middle East because I love just the geopolitical nuances, the history, the culture, things like this. And I truly just want to see something that has cost America, right or wrong, trillions of dollars, thousands of lives, and decades. I want to know that it was worth something. I want to feel that even of all the failures, the foreign policy faux pas, that something good was able to come out of it. And, maybe it's a dream that many of us have, but I think that if it was ever going to happen, again, I can't, implore how important this is. This is the time because of someone like President Trump who won't back down. This is someone who won't allow politics to drive what his foreign policy decisions are. This is a man who gets attacked and ridiculed for nearly every decision. I mean, this is a man who, if he walked on water, the news headline would say President Trump can't swim. I mean, this is just the way it is. But it's personal because, I want to have the ability to show my son some of these, areas that is part of his culture, part of his ethnicity and his blood.
Well, we're waiting for you and for your son and your family to come visit Damascus really soon, and hopefully everything's going to be a lot better. We really appreciate everything that you're doing for Syria. I just want to thank you on behalf of the Syrian people for all of your effort. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I can tell you I look forward to coming there and having zero risk. And as funny as it is, I don't have any fear of being in Syria or Iraq or any of the others. But on my very first trip, a lot of people don't know this, ISIS had found out that I was coming into the country.
Well, and that was in
April of last year.
And
they had actually planned a 2,000-pound car bomb to hit me, and actually had eyes on me when I was in Joba at one point, but our movement was so erratic that they were unable to try and really target anyone. But, the thing is, though, is if I didn't come then, we wouldn't be where we are now. And so we don't have control over our lives, but we do have control over is setting a legacy to say, if I wouldn't have done this, regardless of the risk, then the outcome wouldn't have been that. And so sometimes I think that taking that risk is absolutely necessary. And, difficult times make strong men. And I think that it's time for a lot of people who's been under this dictatorship or this destabilization, it's their turn to rise.
Thank you very much for being here today, and thank you for everything that you've been doing for Syria the past years, I would say, and the Middle East region, I would say, for the last 20 years. And I really hope that you and your family and your son would be able to come and visit us very soon.
I hope so as well. Thanks so much for having me. And again, this is just about trying to not only make America great again, but to also make the Middle East stable again. And I think that we have the right recipe. We just need to make sure we can perform.
Thank you.
Thank you.